The Falkland Islands is an archipelago in the South Atlantic Ocean on the Patagonian Shelf. The principal islands are about east of South America's southern Patagonian coast, and about from the northern tip of the Antarctic Peninsula, at a latitude of about 52 degrees S. The archipelago, with an area of, comprises East Falkland, West Falkland and 776 smaller islands. As a British overseas territory, the Falklands have internal self-governance, and the United Kingdom takes responsibility for their defence and foreign affairs. The Falkland Islands' capital is Stanley on East Falkland. Controversy exists over the Falklands' discovery and subsequent colonisation by Europeans. At various times, the islands have had French, British, Spanish, and Argentine settlements. Britain reasserted its rule in 1833, but Argentina maintains its claim to the islands. In April 1982, Argentine forces occupied the islands. British administration was restored 2 months later at the end of the Falklands War. Almost all Falklanders favour the archipelago remaining a UK overseas territory. Its sovereignty status is part of an ongoing dispute between Argentina and the United Kingdom. The population 3,398 inhabitants in 2016 primarily consists of native-born Falkland Islanders, the majority of British descent. Other ethnicities include French, Gibraltarian and Scandinavian. Immigration from the United Kingdom, the South Atlantic island of St. Helena, and Chile has reversed a population decline. The predominant and official language is English. Under the British Nationality Falkland Islands Act 1983, Falkland Islanders are British citizens. The islands lie on the boundary of the subantarctic oceanic and tundra climate zones, and both major islands have mountain ranges reaching. They are home to large bird populations, although many no longer breed on the main islands because of competition from introduced species. Major economic activities include fishing, tourism and sheep farming, with an emphasis on high-quality wool exports. Oil exploration, licensed by the Falkland Islands government, remains controversial as a result of maritime disputes with Argentina.
Etymology.
The name Falkland Islands comes from Falkland Sound, the strait that separates the two main islands. The name Falkland was applied to the channel by John Strong, captain of an English expedition which landed on the islands in 1690. Strong named the strait in honour of Anthony Carey, 5th Viscount of Falkland, the treasurer of the Navy who sponsored his journey. The Viscount's title originates from the town of Falkland, Scotland. The town's name likely comes from a Gaelic term referring to an enclosure lan, but it could less plausibly be from the Anglo-Saxon term Falkland, land held by folk right. The name Falklands was not applied to the islands until 1765. When British Captain John Byron of the Royal Navy claimed them for King George III as Falklands Islands. The term Falklands is a standard abbreviation used to refer to the islands. The Spanish name for the archipelago, Illes Malvinas, derives from the French Isles Malines, the name given to the islands by French explorer Louis-Antoine de Bougainville in 1764. Bougainville, who founded the island's first settlement, named the area after the port of St. Malo, the point of departure for his ships and colonists. The port, located in the Brittany region of western France, was named after Street Malo or Maclou, the Christian evangelist who founded the city. At the 20th session of the United Nations General Assembly, the Fourth Committee determined that, in all languages other than Spanish, all UN documentation would designate the territory as Falkland Islands Malvinas. In Spanish, the territory was designated as Illes Malvinas Falkland Islands. The nomenclature used by the United Nations for statistical processing purposes is Falkland Islands Malvinas.
History.
Although Fijians from Patagonia may have visited the Falkland Islands in prehistoric times, the islands were uninhabited when Europeans first discovered them. Claims of discovery date back to the 16th century, but no consensus exists on whether early explorers discovered the Falklands or other islands in the South Atlantic. The first recorded landing on the islands is attributed to English Captain John Strong, who, en route to Paris and Chile's littoral in 1690, discovered the Falkland Sound and noted the island's water and game. The Falklands remained uninhabited until the 1764 establishment of Port Louis on East Falkland by French Captain Louis-Antoine de Bougainville, and the 1766 foundation of Port Egmont on Saunders Island by British Captain John McBride. Whether or not the settlements were aware of each other's existence is debated by historians. In 1766, France surrendered its claim on the Falklands to Spain, which renamed the French colony Puerto Soledad the following year. Problems began when Spain discovered and captured Port Egmont in 1770. War was narrowly avoided by its restitution to Britain in 1771. Both the British and Spanish settlements coexisted in the archipelago until 1774, when Britain's new economic and strategic considerations led it to voluntarily withdraw from the islands, leaving a plaque claiming the Falklands for King George III. Spain's viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata became the only governmental presence in the territory. West Falkland was left abandoned, and Puerto Soledad became mostly a prison camp. Amid the British invasions of the Rio de la Plata during the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, the island's governor evacuated the archipelago in 1806. Spain's remaining colonial garrison followed suit in 1811, except for gauchos and fishermen who remained voluntarily. Thereafter, the archipelago was visited only by fishing ships. Its political status was undisputed until 1820, when Colonel David Jewett, an American privateer working for the United Provinces of the Rio de la Plata, informed anchored ships about Buenos Aires' 1816 claim to Spain's territories in the South Atlantic. Since the islands had no permanent inhabitants, in 1823 Buenos Aires granted German-born merchant Louis Vernet permission to conduct fishing activities and exploit feral cattle in the archipelago. Vernet settled at the ruins of Puerto Soledad in 1826. And accumulated resources on the islands until the venture was secure enough to bring settlers and form a permanent colony. Buenos Aires named Vernet military and civil commander of the islands in 1829, and he attempted to regulate sealing to stop the activities of foreign whalers and sealers. Vernet's venture lasted until a dispute over fishing and hunting rights led to a raid by the American warship USS Lexington in 1831. When United States Navy Commander Silas Duncan declared the dissolution of the island's government, Buenos Aires attempted to retain influence over the settlement by installing a garrison, but a mutiny in 1832 was followed the next year by the arrival of British forces who reasserted Britain's rule. The Argentine Confederation headed by Buenos Aires Governor Juan Manuel de Rosas protested against Britain's actions, and Argentine governments have continued since then to register official protests against Britain. The British troops departed after completing their mission, leaving the area without formal government. Vernet's deputy, the Scotsman Matthew Brisbane, returned to the islands that year to restore the business, but his efforts ended after, amid unrest at Port Louis, Gaucho Antonio Rivero led a group of dissatisfied individuals to murder Brisbane and the settlement's senior leaders. Survivors hid in a cave on a nearby island until the British returned and restored order. In 1840, the Falklands became a crown colony, and Scottish settlers subsequently established an official pastoral community. 4 years later, nearly everyone relocated to Port Jackson, considered a better location for government, and merchant Samuel Lafone began a venture to encourage British colonization. Stanley, as Port Jackson was soon renamed, officially became the seat of government in 1845. Early in its history, Stanley had a negative reputation due to cargo shipping losses. Only in emergencies would ships rounding Cape Horn stop at the port. Nevertheless, the Falklands' geographic location proved ideal for ship repairs and the wrecking trade, the business of selling and buying shipwrecks and their cargoes. Aside from this trade, commercial interest in the archipelago was minimal due to the low-value hides of the feral cattle roaming the pastures. Economic growth began only after the Falkland Islands Company, which bought out Lafone's failing enterprise in 1851, successfully introduced Cheviot sheep for wool farming, spurring other farms to follow suit. The high cost of importing materials, combined with the shortage of labor and consequent high wages, meant the ship repair trade became uncompetitive. After 1870, it declined as the replacement of sail ships by steamships was accelerated by the low cost of coal in South America. By 1914, with the opening of the Panama Canal, the trade effectively ended. In 1881, the Falkland Islands became financially independent of Britain. For more than a century, the Falkland Islands Company dominated the trade and employment of the archipelago. In addition, it owned most housing in Stanley, which greatly benefited from the wool trade with the UK. Substantive sovereignty talks again ended by 1981, and the dispute escalated with passing time. In April 1982, the disagreement became an armed conflict when Argentina invaded the Falklands and other British territories in the South Atlantic, briefly occupying them until a UK expeditionary force retook the territories in June. After the war, the United Kingdom expanded its military presence, building Rough Mount Pleasant and increasing the size of its garrison. The war also left some 117 minefields containing nearly 20,000 mines of various types, including anti-vehicle and anti-personnel mines. Due to the large number of deminer casualties, initial attempts to clear the mines ceased in 1983. Landmine clearance work restarted in 2009. In accordance with the UK's obligations under the Ottawa Treaty, and Sapper Hill Corral was cleared of mines in 2012, allowing access to an important historical landmark for the first time in 30 years. Argentina and the UK re-established diplomatic relations in 1990. Relations have since deteriorated as neither has agreed on the terms of future sovereignty discussions. Disputes between the governments have led some analysts to predict a growing conflict of interest between Argentina and Great Britain. Because of the recent expansion of the fishing industry in the waters surrounding the Falklands.
Government.
The Falkland Islands are a self-governing British overseas territory. Under the 2009 Constitution, the islands have full internal self-government. The UK is responsible for foreign affairs, retaining the power to protect UK interests and to ensure the overall good governance of the territory. The monarch of the United Kingdom is the head of state, and executive authority is exercised on the monarch's behalf by the governor, who appoints the island's chief executive on the advice of members of the Legislative Assembly. Both the governor and the chief executive serve as the head of government. Governor Nigel Phillips was appointed in September 2017 and Chief Executive Barry Rowland was appointed in October 2016. The UK minister responsible for the Falkland Islands since 2019, Christopher Pincher, administers British foreign policy regarding the islands. The governor acts on the advice of the island's Executive Council, composed of the Chief Executive, the Director of Finance and 3 elected members of the Legislative Assembly with the Governor as chairman. As a territory of the United Kingdom, the Falklands are part of the overseas countries and territories of the European Union. The island's judicial system, overseen by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, is largely based on English law, and the Constitution binds the territory to the principles of the European Convention on Human Rights. Law enforcement is the responsibility of the Royal Falkland Islands Police RFIP, and military defence of the islands is provided by the United Kingdom. A British military garrison is stationed on the islands, and the Falkland Islands government funds an additional company-sized light infantry Falkland Islands Defence Force. The Falklands claim an exclusive economic zone is extending from its coastal baselines. Based on the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, this zone overlaps with these of Argentina.
Sovereignty dispute.
The United Kingdom and Argentina both claim the Falkland Islands. The UK bases its position on its continuous administration of the islands since 1833 and the islanders' right to self-determination as set out in the UN Charter. Argentina's position is that it acquired the Falklands from Spain when it achieved independence in 1816, and that, in 1833, the UK expelled Argentine authorities and settlers from the islands with the threat of greater force and, afterwards, barred Argentines from resettling the islands. In 2009, the British Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, had a meeting with the Argentine President, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, and said that there would be no further talks over the sovereignty of the Falklands. In March 2013, the Falkland Islands held a referendum on its political status. 99.8% of voters favored remaining a British overseas territory. Argentina does not recognize the Falkland Islanders as a partner in negotiations.
Geography.
The Falkland Islands have a land area of and a coastline estimated at. The archipelago consists of two main islands, West Falkland and East Falkland, and about 776 smaller islands. The islands are predominantly mountainous and hilly, with the major exception being the depressed plains of Lafonia Peninsula forming the southern part of East Falkland. The Falklands consists of continental crust fragments resulting from the breakup of Gondwana and the opening of the South Atlantic that began 130 million years ago. The islands are located in the South Atlantic Ocean, on the Patagonian Shelf, about east of Patagonia in southern Argentina. The Falklands' approximate location is latitude and longitude. The archipelago's two main islands are separated by the Falkland Sound, and its deep coastal indentations form natural harbors. East Falkland houses Stanley, the capital and largest settlement, the UK military base at RAF Mount Pleasant, and the archipelago's highest point, Mount Usborne, at. Outside of these significant settlements is the area colloquially known as Camp, which is derived from the Spanish term for countryside campo. The climate of the islands is cold, windy and humid maritime. Variability of daily weather is typical throughout the archipelago. Rainfall is common over half of the year, averaging in Stanley, and sporadic light snowfall occurs near